Disclaimer: the following content is entirely fictional and does not represent real events or people. This material has been edited and adapted from the channel Dreamtelling Channel. You've got an infestation. I can see that, Alannah replied, scowling at the man. The shop was covered in glittering gold dust. Did he think it was there for the aesthetic? How do I get rid of them? Well, there's traps. Not likely to get all of them, though. Little buggers breed like rabbits. Another swathe of pixie dust floated to the ground. The man scratched his nose and it turned blue. I could try fumigation. Sounds expensive. She flicked a pixie off her ledger. It slammed into the wall opposite and thudded to the ground. How much? 300, he said. Promptly. Minimum. Her scowl deepened. He wasn't an exterminator. He was a crook. 150. 200. 175. She says. And they'll throw in a batch of mermaid scales. Done. The man held his hand out and she shook it. Course. It'll take a few days to get my kit together. She rolled her eyes. Of course it will. When you can get rid of them. 2 weeks. 2 weeks. How am I supposed to stay in business for 2 weeks? A shrug. I don't stock pixie traps. I'll have to ship 'em from the city. She growled and the pixies danced circles over her head. All right. Fine. Just be here in 2 weeks. Sure thing. Miss. He touched a finger to what she hoped was a non-existent hat, rather than an invisible one, and slipped out the front door. Alannah flopped into her chair and dislodged a cloud of golden dust. Just perfect. Grandmother's ash and quartz stave hung in its place on the far wall, untouched by dust. She would never have let this happen. One twitch of that staff and the pixies would have fled, screeching. For a second, Alannah imagined what it would be like to give up the shop. Let another witch take up her grandmother's legacy. Leaving her to do what? Exactly. She'd never make it on her own. That was the one thing she and grandmother agreed on. A pixie landed on the wooden counter and twirled in a way that managed to come off both graceful and patronizing. Oh. Shut up, she muttered. And don't get comfortable. In 2 weeks, you'll all be pinned to the wall by your wings. Tiny cries of anger echoed through her shop. One of her vases toppled off the counter and crashed to the floor. For goodness sake, she muttered. The door opened and the tiny golden bell beside her let out a high clear ring. We're closed, Alannah called. Without looking, she swept dust off her ledger and slammed it shut. Ah. I just wanted to know if you needed any help. Hi. William. The knight had combed his dark hair and held a bunch of bluebells tightly in one hand. Thank you. But I don't need any help. He cast a doubtful glance at her dust-layered shop. There are a lot of pixies here. The things danced around William excitedly, twinkling and shedding dust everywhere. He gave one a hesitant smile and it swooned. Honestly, Alannah muttered. What happened? He asked, ducking under the wreath of glowing pixies. The crate of yew bark I got last week was filled with pixie eggs. She grabbed a broom from the corner and got to work on the broken vase. now infested with the pests. Oh. He hesitated, his rich brown skin reddening under her gaze. Are you sure you don't want any help? Quite sure. He shifted his weight and she quirked an eyebrow. Anything else? Yes. He thrust the wilting flowers at her. Here. These are for you. I thought they'd go with your, his gaze searched her face. Your hair ribbon. She sighed. That's very sweet. But I'm allergic to those flowers. He deflated. Oh. Why don't you give them to Clara? She prompted. I'm sure she'd love bluebells. She and Clara were the only unmarried women below 40 in the village. She should have realized William would have rested his heart on one of them, but why couldn't it have been the mayor's daughter? I suppose. Alannah winced. Clara probably wouldn't appreciate second-hand wildflowers. Can I help you get rid of the pixies? Asked William. Perking up. The creatures squeaked in response. Really? The peal of a bell interrupted her. William stiffened. That's the warning bell, he said and darted out of her shop. Great, muttered Alannah. Now what? But she followed William out into the street. At the end of the cobbled street sat the watchtower. From it came the angry peal of the bell. More villagers were pouring out of their shops and houses, peering up at the tower. What's going on? She shouted. Is it an attack? Someone asked. The other kingdom. It must be attacking. Alannah cursed. Their aging king had been on the verge of declaring war for the last year. But why now? Why her village? Where are they? She scanned the horizon for the shadow of cavalry. William shaded his eyes with one hand. I don't see anything. A huge shadow passed over the street and Alannah swallowed. Fear froze her limbs. Dragon. The street erupted in chaos. Alannah was thrust to the edge of the road as people pushed and shoved her out of the way. Roaring through the air came a shriek. High and piercing with a growl that rumbled underneath. She slapped her hands over her ears, seeing others do the same. Another high, ugly shriek. Get back, shouted William. Stay under cover. Despite herself, Alannah stepped out from the shelter of her shop and peered south. A dark, curling shape swooped across the clouds gracefully and then dropped down. It landed in a field just south of the village and spread its wings, as though it had every right to be there. Alannah elbowed her way to the mayor, who stood gazing at the fields as though all his nightmares had come to life. What's down there? She asked him. Petty's farm. All the sheep are out in those fields. Alannah eyed the dragon. Not for much longer. Now's my chance. William stood at her elbow, gazing at the dragon. But it wasn't fear that lit his expression. It was eagerness. William. This is my test. Felmir's captain has to accept me if I bring them a dragon's head. Can you kill it? Asked the mayor hopefully. Wait. Hold on. Alannah interrupted. That thing's as big as 4 horses, probably bigger, and you have no idea what it's capable of or what it wants. You'll be eviscerated. He gave her a blank look. Killed. That dragon is threatening our village, he said sternly. She looked at it again. There were less little white dots than there had been a moment ago. But the dragon wasn't getting any closer. It's not threatening us. It's just eating our sheep. The mayor drew himself up. That is a threat to our livelihood. The dragon must be destroyed. Better lock up your daughter. Then, she said, with sympathy. Dragons have a thing for princesses. And Clara's the closest thing we've got. With a moan, the mayor turned on his heel and fled back to his house. Alannah put her hands on her hips and stared across the village at the dark figure of the dragon. Maybe it's just passing through, she suggested. William was scowling, arms crossed over his chest. I'll chop off its head and mount it on my wall. You couldn't kill a deer if it was chasing you, she said as an aside, and he grumbled but didn't argue. A dragon would mean fear, which would mean that her sales in protective charms would go through the roof. Alannah rolled up her sleeves. She turned on William, whose expression hadn't eased. Don't do anything stupid, she told him. At least not until the council tells you to. Alannah stared hard at the ledger. But the numbers didn't change. Dragons weren't as lucrative as Shed hoped. No one was buying grandmother's charms. And the thread wards Shed created sat where they had for the last 3 years, collecting pixie dust under the counter. At this rate, she wouldn't make it 2 weeks. The shop would fold long before that happened. The shop bell rang. A client, finally. Alannah pushed herself to her feet and pasted on a smile. The mayor walked through the door, hesitant and clutching a little blue box. Mayor McCannon. She eyed the man. Is there something I can help you with? Clara asked me to give these to you. He set the box down and opened it. Nestled inside were 6 tiny cakes, frosted with sugar. Something to do with flowers. I hope you know what that means. Because I have no idea what she's talking about. Alannah huffed out a laugh. William. Thank you. She never could resist baked goods. The cake melted on her tongue. Fluffy and flavored with almond. Delicious. The mayor smiled and wandered to the window. A pixie lounged on the sill, half drunk and giggling. It flew away as the man approached. It's been 3 days, he muttered, glaring out the window at the blackened fields. And that creature hasn't gone anywhere. What is it waiting for? It must still be hungry. She plucked a second cake and swallowed it in a few bites. What would your grandmother have done? The mayor asked, turning to lean against the sill. Alannah paused. She should be used to it by now. The way people disregarded her as a witch. But it still hurt. Fight it, she admitted. Grandmother had a talent for firestorms and hurricanes. Even a dragon wouldn't have survived that. What about other witches? McCannon continued. Is there anyone who could help? Not that I know of. They'd lost touch with the covens when grandmother had moved out here, just after her mother died. A surge of dizziness made her vision swim, and she blinked rapidly. I'm not in contact with any other witches. The dizziness wasn't going away. Mayor McCannon exhaled. I thought you'd say that. Her bell rang again. And 2 tall men slipped through the door. Alannah peered at them. Farmers. She knew them. But, why couldn't she remember their names? She stumbled and clutched at the counter. Her gaze fell on the little dusted cakes. "These aren't from Clara," she said. Hoarsely. "No," the mayor confirmed. "Clara's much too kind to do something like this. You understand, don't you? I couldn't let that beast take my own daughter." Alannah tried to speak, but her lips were numb. No. But the thought skittered away from her as her vision went dark. She woke tied to a pole and surrounded by sheep. A dull ache throbbed behind her eyes. "Drugs," she muttered. "I mean, seriously. They couldn't have thought up something more original." The sheep ignored her, seemingly unaware of their upcoming doom. She wriggled, wincing as the rope cut into her wrists. The post she was tied to had been driven into the ground in a hurry. It was listing a little to the side, and the earth at its foot hadn't been packed in properly. Clearly these kidnappers were amateurs. Alannah twisted to look behind her. But the village was hidden by the slope of the hill. Once green and lush with grass, now brown and scorched. "They could have at least given me a sword," she muttered. And the dress. The dress. What kind of self-respecting princess wandered around in silk slippers and a white satin tent? Her shoulders were freezing. The smell of wood smoke clung to the air. But it wasn't as comforting as usual. "Where the hell is that knight?" she muttered. William was a poor excuse for a knight. But he was the only one they had. And he was late. A piercing shriek cut through the sound of the wind and descended into a low plice, growling rumble which trembled through her chest. The sheep startled and huddled together. They were either too stupid to run or their instinct knew a dragon when it heard one. Alannah swore and resumed her struggle. She twisted her hands, wriggling against the rope. Her wrists stung. Another high, piercing shriek. Closer. It was definitely coming closer. Then the pole shifted, holding her breath. She moved again in the same way. Again it moved. Thank the goddess. She closed her hands around the pole and threw her weight to the side. The pole moved again, groaning as it pulled against the earth. The sheep had given up trying to find edible bracken amongst the charred earth and were watching her, wide-eyed. "Oh, come on." She hurled her body in the other direction. With a groan, the pole upended and crashed to the earth. Alannah grunted as she hit the ground. The rope was looped around the pole as well as her wrists. She crawled along the ground, sliding her bindings over the pole towards the tip, inch by inch. Finally, when her wrists were raw and her back was aching, the rope slipped off the end, and she was free. Exhaling, Alannah brushed off the ends of the rope and rubbed her aching wrists. She was going to use one of her grandmother's charms to turn that mayor into a toad. Then a gust of hot, brimstone-infused air blew her ridiculous skirts in every direction. Alannah swallowed, turned around. There, on the slope of the hill, looking amused, for there was no other way to describe it, stood the dragon. Her limbs went cold. It was much bigger than it looked from a distance. Its 4 legs were tipped with wicked-looking talons and its wings were half-raised and twice the length of its body. It tilted its head, horse-like, but for its crown of horns. Its scales weren't black, like Shed thought, but a violet so dark it looked like jet. One night wouldn't be enough against this thing. An army wouldn't be enough against this thing. Her gaze flicked to the edge of the hill, which sloped down toward the village. I could make it if I run. The dragon snorted as if it could hear her. I'll end up cremated if I run, she corrected. Perhaps cremation was better than a slow, disintegrating death within its digestive system. Somewhere behind her a sheep bleated and the dragon twitched. It snapped forward and the sheep disappeared inside a wide, fanged maw. Definitely better to go for cremation. Alannah bolted towards the village. She got 3 steps before the ground vanished beneath her feet. Her head dropped forward. Suddenly, much heavier. And the earth, and the fluffy, white sheep, shrank. Long, vicious claws gripped her torso, squeezing the breath out of her. Alannah closed her eyes tightly and concentrated on not being sick. Bad enough that she was going to get eaten. She could at least bear it without emptying the contents of her stomach all over the stupid white dress. But long minutes passed and she remained alive. Gradually, the roar of the wind and the swooping sensation in her stomach became easier to bear. The claws didn't loosen, but they didn't tighten and crush her to death either. Maybe this dragon liked his fake princesses in one piece. She'd soon find out. When she opened her eyes, the stars were winking into view, and the moon was cresting the horizon. The terrain below was shadowed and unfamiliar. Dragon flight was ridiculously faster than any horse. And they'd been flying for hours. Were they even in the same kingdom anymore? Flying, she thought in amazement. She was actually flying. If she wasn't going to be eaten, she might actually be enjoying it. Then a note in their travel changed. The dragon's wing beats slowed and the wind dropped. They were landing. The dark earth swooped up to meet her. Alannah pressed her eyes closed and braced for impact. It didn't come. The talons loosened and she dropped 2 feet to the ground in a sprawl of white satin. How undignified. Thank you for that, she muttered. She scrambled to her feet and brushed herself off. Her ridiculous dress was stained black with mud, and her dark hair was a tangled mess. She straightened her shoulders and turned to regard the dragon. It turned so it was looking at her side on. Its visible eye narrowed. There was a single, thin pupil in it, splitting the orb in 2. They lied to me. She jumped. That voice had been inside her head. They stood on a low cliff, which sloped into a dark cave. Like an eyrie. It was deserted. Except for the dragon. She eyed it warily. That wasn't you, she said, feeling foolish. Was it? The dragon snorted. Who else did you think it was? The voice was deep, gravelly, male. No one told me dragons were telepathic, she said. They lied to me, it said. Again. A dragon was speaking to her. Alannah shook her head and wondered if she'd lived to tell anyone about it. What are you talking about? She asked. Who lied? Your villagers. It said. It was distressingly easy to think of the creature as a person. It lowered its head and inhaled. The satin of her skirt rustled. Its nostrils flared. Easily as big as her hands. You're not a princess. Hey! Keep your nose to yourself. And unless I'm mistaken, you're not a maid. Either. That is none of your damn business. She hissed. Why did they think you would be a suitable sacrifice? The dragon was watching her, and she got the impression again that it was amused. It was toying with her. Well, two could play at that game. Alannah shook out her voluminous skirts and straightened the floofy bits on her arms. Well, she said, you didn't exactly give us much option. It didn't matter how she felt about her village. No one else got to talk them down. In case you hadn't noticed. My village isn't exactly rolling in princesses. Or maids. I take it. Are you going to eat me or what? If not, you can just take me home. She added. Quickly. Or at least point me in the right direction. The village is days away by foot. Alannah sighed. I was afraid you were going to say that. The dragon reared back and spread its wings. A familiar shiver ran over her skin. Shed recognized that feeling anywhere, magic. The dragon's figure wavered. Then shrank. Its scales paled and turned to smooth skin. Its wings and tail disappeared and its horns shrank to the size of a ram's. Before her eyes, the dragon transformed into the figure of a young man. Alannah gaped. What, how did you do that? His thin lips curled in a smirk. Magic. He purred. A transformation spell. His hair was lighter than his scales had been. But not by much. His face was drawn and strong. Sharp lines. Although his body had light muscle under pale skin. And, oh. She averted her eyes. Scales apparently didn't convert to clothing. Something dark on his neck caught her eye. Thin runes scrawled down the side of his throat and over his shoulder. The same line of script was reflected on the other side of his torso. You're not very good at it. Are you? She asked. Smirking. The dragon blinked. What? She nodded at the runes. Only incompetent warlocks leave traces like that. His eyes narrowed. You're a witch. Alannah grinned. The dragon was absurdly good-looking in this form. But it was much easier not to fear him. He'd find it hard to cremate her without that fire breath. I dabble. She said. Modestly. You're the first witch anyone's ever sent me. Lucky me. Alannah stepped up to the edge of the cliff. Paths wound down the stone like the tracks of snails. At the base of the plateau was a dark, thick forest. And beyond that she could make out the shadowed shapes of mountains against the stars. Nothing familiar. Are we still in Threna? We're about 3 days' travel from your village. A matter of hours as the dragon flies. Brilliant. And she was going to get home. How? Why exactly did you bring me here? He spread his hands. Welcome to my home. She quirked an eyebrow. Apart from the thin, grassy plateau on which they stood. The inside of the cave was littered with broken rock, and what looked like the bleached bones of many small animals. Nothing big enough to be human. Thankfully. But the place was still filthy. Nice. Really. I'm impressed. His expression twitched. Sarcasm is the lowest form of humor. And the highest form of wit. The dragon stared at her. "You're not afraid of me, are you?" he asked, tilting those spiraled horns. She eyed him. Barefoot, naked, and with the lines of a poorly cast spell written across his body. "Should I be?" "Most humans are," he added, with a quirk of his mouth. It could have been wry, but there was something about it that looked almost sad. He was still standing far too close to comfort. She stepped away from the cave wall, moving out, so there was space at her back. "Exactly how many people have you brought back here?" she asked, suspiciously. He grinned. "Just this side of sleazy." Her pulse jumped in response, and she scowled. "Not nearly enough. I thought most dragons were interested in gold," she pointed out. "Or gems. Or treasure, or something." He shrugged. "My taste has always run towards more entertaining pursuits," he said, with a leer. "And you can't find that kind of entertainment among your own species?" She asked and wondered if any hybrids had been born to these princesses. That would be an awkward conversation for the future king. "Humans are more interesting. Most kingdoms tend to give up their princess quite easily." "So that's what you were doing in our village?" She snorted. "You could have picked a better town. In case you hadn't noticed, princesses are pretty rare in villages with 100 people or less. Actually, I was on my way to your capital, but I got hungry." He ran his tongue over sharp, plentiful teeth, somehow managing to look both dangerous and devastatingly handsome at the same time. If it wasn't for the fact that he was a dragon and she had actual principles about who she spent her nights with, she'd be sorely tempted to linger here. The fact that she was sorely tempted in spite of those two things was yet another reason why she should get out of here as quickly as possible. Your villagers panicked. They promised me a princess if I agreed to leave. So I did. He frowned. Then, do you have any princesses? No, she replied, and moved again so that she was a little closer to the edge. But I assume that there are other young women in your village. Of course there are. She stopped, slowly shifting towards the path, and narrowed her eyes at him. Why? You're not planning on going back, are you? Because we may not have princesses, but we have knights. A whole army of them. He raised one brow. All right. One. But he's the bravest, noblest knight in the entire kingdom. Relax, he said, amused. I'm not going back to your village. I doubt they have many sheep left. Anyway. She released a slow breath. If he wasn't going back, then she didn't have much chance of getting a lift. She'd have to find her own way back. So? The dragon asked, and she turned from the forest to regard him. If your village had no princesses, why did they send you? If they wanted you to fight me, they weren't doing you a favor by tying you to a pole and saddling you with that. He tilted his horned head at her black corset and the endless satin skirt. They knew I couldn't fight you. Her lip curled. I'm not that good a witch. The dragon arched his eyebrows but said nothing. I was the only one without a family. Her grandmother died years ago. And, apart from William, no one would even notice she was gone. Let alone care. She might have done the same thing if Shed had to make the choice. Maybe. It didn't stop it hurting. Though. And the mayor didn't want to risk his own daughter. And these are the people you're so keen to return to. His mouth curled. They don't seem to care very much for your welfare. Given that they tied you to a stick as dragon bait. Needled. She shot back. They wouldn't have had to if you hadn't been terrorizing our village. And you were the one who wanted a princess. They offered me a princess. He replied. I didn't ask for anything. She pressed her lips together and looked away. Into the dark velvet sky. For a moment there was silence, save for the rustling wind. Alannah smoothed out her hands. Grimacing at the dirt caked beneath her fingernails. What about me? Asked Alannah. Can't you fly me back? The dragon stretched. Tendons flexing and going taut. No. I'm not flying anywhere again tonight. Some dragon you are. She muttered. Alannah took another step towards the path and he turned. Keeping her in his sight. Don't witches usually have familiars? Toads. Or owls, or something. I'm allergic. She replied. His eyebrows shot up again. You are unusual. He murmured. Something wet landed on her bare shoulder. Startled. Alannah glanced up at the sky and was rewarded with another drop on her nose. Rain. Now. The dragon hissed. She glanced at him and found him standing with his shoulders hunched and his expression twisted. He looked like a giant sleek cat that'd been caught in a downpour. I'm guessing dragons aren't all that fond of rain. She said dryly. Dragons breathe fire. He said. Of course, we don't like rain. At that moment. The sky opened. Her stupid silk dress clung to her, like a shroud, and sent a series of icy shudders to her core. Where the hell did this come from? She muttered. She eyed the entrance to the dragon's cave. Well. Maybe sticking around for a little longer wasn't such a bad idea. There was no way she could travel in this. The dragon had already retreated to the cave's entrance and stood. Shaking out his hair and scattering drops of water over the ground. Honestly. He barely looked wet. Alannah cast one last glance up at the sky and sighed. She jogged the few steps to the outer rim of the cave. Alannah tucked herself into a small ball and huddled at the entrance to the cave. From the ground drifted a wet, fresh smell that reminded her of new flowers and overturned soil. A shudder racked her and she curled in a little tighter. If you're cold, came the dragon's voice, loaded with innuendo. Don't come a foot closer, she said. Or it'll make you regret it. I thought you weren't very good at spells. I don't need a spell to kick you where it hurts. He laughed and slid a few steps closer. Even in his human form. He moved in an unearthly way. As precise and graceful as a snake on the hunt. And that's what he is. She reminded herself. Nothing but a snake on the hunt for a mostly defenseless mouse. You'll catch something fatal if you stay in those wet clothes. He purred. Alannah rubbed her hands together briskly. Nonsense, she said. Why don't you start a fire and we can both warm up? Dragon fire had to be good for something. I'm starting to see why they tried to get rid of you, said the dragon, and it was only with strong control that she managed to suppress a wince. She avoided his eyes. Oh. Please. Is that a request? He interrupted, and she rolled her eyes. I'm starting to see why you have to blackmail people into giving up their princesses. I'd be shocked if you actually managed to get one yourself. Certainly not if they're anything like you. He muttered, and she threw him a glare. Have it your way. A tingle of magic crept up her spine. It felt like the dragon himself. Warm, sultry, and difficult to ignore. She watched, wide-eyed, as the dragon's human form melted away and he resumed his dark, reptilian shape. The temperature jumped up, as though a furnace had been lit beside her. That was actually quite impressive, she admitted. I'm flattered, he replied caustically. Now that Shed heard his human voice, she recognized it in his mental words. It was the same deep, rough silk sound. He turned and Alannah ducked to avoid his massive, bat-like wings. Where are you going? She called. To sleep. The dragon's long tail vanished into the darkness and his voice echoed back through her mind. I trust that you can find your own way back. And just like that he was gone. And she was alone in a damp cave in the middle of nowhere. Alannah sat back against the rock wall. I hate dragons, she decided. Selfish. Conceited. Arrogant, I hope you can hear me, she added, throwing the words in the direction he'd gone. I'm going to tell every knight on the continent where you live. Be my guest. Exasperated, she dragged her fingers through her hair. The rain didn't look like it was going to let up anytime soon. Which meant that she wasn't going home anytime soon. Either. Not that anyone back home would care. Not true, William would be missing her. She snorted. If he's even looking for me. Maybe William had been in on it too. Maybe they all had. Maybe the dragon was right. No. She thought. I can't think that. They had to be missing her. But no one came riding to my rescue. Did they? Said another part of her mind. Well. So, what? She'd been absolutely fine, rescuing herself so far. She'd just have to do it again. She sighed and rested her chin on her knees. Just as soon as this damn rain stopped. Something glinted among the shattered rocks. Frowning, Alannah reached forward and dug it out. It was a small, oval thing. Dark violet and with a faint sheen. It gleamed in the palm of her hand. Even in the darkness. Her breath hissed out from between her teeth. A dragon scale. A handful more littered the cave floor. She could make a decent amount of gold from these. Or cast a damn good spell. At least Shed gets something out of this whole fiasco. Alannah tucked a handful into a small pocket in her dress and waited for the rain to ease. Dawn crept over the edge of the world. Alannah stood and brushed the larger clods of dirt off her dress. The forest at the base of the cliff stretched on for miles. A tangled thicket of dark trees. On her left the sun was rising, dusting the trees with gold and lighting up puddles on the plateau. Alannah yawned widely and stretched her arms overhead. A few hours spent cramped against a stone wall were not conducive to a good night's sleep. Alannah glanced back at the cave. It was still dark. Still quiet. Better to be out of here before he wakes up. Alannah tugged her feet out of the mud and grimaced. Silk slippers were going to be more of a hindrance than Shed thought. The cliff looked easier in daylight. She kept one hand on the rock and went slowly. Nettles tore holes in her dress as she descended, nothing but an improvement. At this point, but the path took her east, following the ridge of the cliff until the trees became less a carpet of tangled leaves and more a canopy above her head. Only once she was among them, hidden from the dragon's cave. Did the final shred of tension bleed out of her muscles? They weren't going to believe her when she got home. Escaped from a dragon, she could charge for that kind of story. The forest stank of damp moss. Sunlight filtered through the canopy in gold-green shafts and skylarks twittered in the trees. But there was no sign of human life. I wish Ed checked that cave for a weapon, she muttered. Maybe there'd been a dead knight or two she could have scavenged from. Dragons were one thing. But who knew how far wolves came in off the mountains? Not to mention the pixies and the wood spirits. And the fae. She'd have to tread carefully. Alannah tugged at a loose, pearly thread in the skirt of her dress, and it unraveled with ease. Shoddy workmanship. She snapped off a piece a few inches long. Grandmother had her stave. And other witches had swords or daggers. Thread was the only thing her magic seemed to respond to, much to grandmother's scorn. Muttering an incantation, she let the severed thread fall to the ground. It pointed forward and slightly to her right. The way home. But the line was very slightly crooked. She frowned at it. "Don't be stupid," she said, grateful there was no one around to see her talking to her magic. "Of course I want to get home." She was tired. Her focus was probably off. There was no other reason for the thread to be pointing towards the dragon. Sighing, Alannah picked up the thread and wrapped it around her finger. Then she picked up her skirts and stalked through the forest in the direction her thread indicated. After a few minutes the light began to brighten as the sun rose towards its zenith. For hours, that dragon had said. On foot that could be days. And she had nothing but this hideously impractical dress and silk slippers to keep her going. Not even a crust of bread. The mayor will pay for this. Alannah stumbled over a root and swore. And that damn dragon. I wouldn't be in this forest if it wasn't for him. Alannah stopped again and recast her thread. It pointed to her left. She'd gotten off course. There was still a crooked bump right in the middle. The magic tingled in her fingers, and she would have sworn it was laughing. "I'm being ridiculous," she said, and rewrapped the thread, ignoring it. The light gradually changed as she walked, shadows shortening and lengthening again. Her feet ached with each step and her ankles were scratched, practically raw. Every now and again her stomach submitted a complaint and she did her best to ignore it. Nothing seemed to grow in this forest but belladonna, and she wasn't stupid enough to touch that. She'd been walking for 2 or 3 hours, staring sightlessly at the ground beneath her feet, when the earth changed. Sunk into the mud at regular intervals were the imprints of boots. Alannah stopped, narrowed her eyes. A trail of packed dirt cut right across her path, and then ran parallel to it, dotted with footprints. All different sizes and all traveling the same way. Large boot prints flanked it, crossing the path at intervals and circling around it. Whoever they were. Perhaps she could bargain with them to let her tag along. Alannah quickened her pace. They were heading northeast, the same as she, and made no effort to hide their progress. After about an hour, and one too many stinging nettles for comfort, the quiet birdsong became the murmur of voices. Alannah slowed down to listen. "Come on. Get a move on," she heard. A man, mid-40s and with an addiction to tobacco. Judging by the timbre of his voice. "Better hurry if we want to be in port by dusk tomorrow." "Pick up your feet," cried a second man. Then there was the crack of leather on flesh and a cry, a human cry. "Stop sniveling. You'll be sold soon enough. Then you won't have to keep walking. Will you?" The other man snorted. "If your new master doesn't make you work for your living." Slavers. They must be taking their newest haul to city for auction. Alannah hiked her skirts up and started walking at right angles to the group. She was on her own. She could move a lot more quickly than a group of slaves could. If she went around them, she could avoid them entirely. She trod cautiously, avoiding every stray twig. Luckily, the ground here was still soft from the rain, and it absorbed the sound of her footfalls. "Come on. Come on. Break's over. Get a move on." Another whack of leather on flesh. These slavers didn't spare the whip. Alannah held her breath. She was almost past them. "What's this?" She spun around. A heavy-set man with a mustache grabbed her, grounding her as solidly as if she'd been chained. "Sonia. We've get another one." "Let go of me," she spat, prying at the fingers that sat like meaty sausages on her arm. "I swear I'll set you on fire. I'll curse you." The man dragged her through the trees and into a lighter clearing. "A Spitfire. This one," he called. 4 other slavers stood in the clearing, dressed in wool and leather with whips coiled at their hip. A string of 20 people stood huddled in the middle, ranging from older men to young girls and even children. Their hands were tied to a single rope, which stretched between them in a long line. Goddess. She was in so much trouble. "I'm serious," she insisted. "I'm a witch. If you don't let me go right now, I'll..." "Quiet." The man threw her to the ground at the foot of another slaver. "Found her trying to sneak round us." "Where are you going?" she asked. "Maybe I could tag along." "Shut up." This slaver was a woman with a thick blonde braid. She plucked at Alannah's dress, turning the material over in her fingers. "Silk. Pretty expensive for a witch." Damn. She should have known this dress would do her in one way or the other. It was a gift. "This is something a noble would wear." She straightened. "Or a princess. And we don't get many princesses around here." Behind her a man crowed. "Yeah. We should know about that, right?" They guffawed and the slaves in the center hunched down even further. Alannah grit her teeth. "I am not a princess." She gestured at her dress. Would a princess really wander round this forest? On her own? Dressed in mud like this? "Whatever you say." The slaver pushed her to the back of the procession. "Get in line with the others. We'll add you to the auction." So she found herself trudging along at the back of a slave train, her hands tied at the wrist and her dress hanging off her in mud-stained tatters. "Princess my ass." The slavers marched along at the side of the procession, watching them with hawk eyes and hands lingering close to their whips. The slaves were silent, cowed, and they walked as though their spirits had been beaten out of them. Alannah eyed the whips. Maybe they had. The depressing train turned north, away from her village. And Alannah pressed her lips together. Fantastic. Tied up again in less than 2 days. This had to be some kind of record. She was at the back of the slave train, between a slender young girl and a boy who looked no older than 10. Monsters. They marched through the forest, and the sun only intensified. Alannah's mouth was parched and sweat soaked the back of her neck. They were allocated short rest breaks every hour or so. Only enough time to get their breath back. Then they were moving again. The rope was tight on her wrists. Too tight to slip out of. And the slavers were always watching. Finally, the shadows lengthened and the warm spring breeze turned cooler. The slavers called a halt. Alannah sucked in a deep breath. This slow march was murder on her thighs. The slaver called Sonia seemed to be in charge. She directed the others with a low, hoarse voice. Janik. Get a fire going. Ramiz. Make sure our slaves will survive for another day. The man named Ramiz journeyed down the rope, handing each slave a biscuit and a mouthful of water. Alannah took hers with a scowl. Their captors huddled around a glowing fire a few feet away and the slaves bedded down where they were, curling in on themselves to keep warm. Alannah sighed and sat cross-legged on the ground. Well, at least she was dry now. All day in the sunlight and her dress had turned stiff, caked in mud. How anyone could mistake her for royalty was beyond her. An odd sound broke her concentration. Almost like a whimpering puppy. Alannah looked to the young boy who'd been tied next to her on the rope. But he was asleep. The sound persisted. Whatever it was. Someone should put the thing out of its misery. Then she realized it was coming from the girl who'd walked behind her. She was curled on the ground, not that far away, weeping into a scrap of her dress. Alannah picked dirt off her hands and tried to ignore it. The girl kept crying. With a sigh, Alannah stood and circled around to kneel beside her. Hey! Damn it! She really wasn't good at the sympathy thing. What are you, what's wrong? Big blue eyes blinked up at her. The girl wore a silk dress much fancier than hers. All rose pink with tiny silk rosebuds sewn into the bodice. Her hair was a riot of chestnut curls. Still almost pristine despite what must have been days on the road. And her skin was a clear and unblemished brown. What's wrong? The girl repeated. Her voice still husky from the tears. I've been kidnapped by slavers. They're going to sell me off to the highest bidder and I, her face crumpled and she descended into sobs. Alannah patted her shoulder awkwardly. Very aware of the slave traders, sat not 10 feet away. Yes. I can see how that would be, disheartening. She said, and the girl's sobs intensified. But your family's probably looking for you. I'm sure they'll find you soon. The girl shook her head rapidly. By the time they realize I'm gone, it'll be too late. Alannah tucked her feet underneath her to stop them from getting pins and needles. What's your name? Rose. Of course it was. I'm Alannah. She said and added a smile, she hoped was reassuring. And I'm sure we can find a way out of this. Rose pushed herself into a sitting position and blinked dewy eyes. Really? No one had any right to remain as pretty as that after crying for 20 minutes. Her skin wasn't even blotchy. Is it true? She asked. What you were saying before. Are you really a witch? Alannah sat back on her heels. Well. Yes. I mean. Sort of. What do you mean sort of? Said Rose with a snappy tone that had Alannah blinking in surprise. Are you? Or aren't you? Yes. Then. I am. Then you can get us out of here. Said Rose, clasping her hands together at her throat. Alannah shook her head. I only stopped being an apprentice a few years ago. I can't do much more than a few protective charms and some domestic cures. Oh. Rose dropped her hands. That's all right, she said, and patted Alannah's knee with faint condescension. I'm sure someone will rescue us. Alannah didn't voice her doubts on that subject. No one knew where she was. In fact, they probably thought she'd been eaten. That would be much worse, she said aloud. What would be worse? Asked Rose. Being eaten by a dragon. Alannah explained. That would be worse than being sold into slavery. Rose stared at her. How on earth did you come up with that? I was almost eaten by one, she admitted. He left me at his cave back that way. She pointed off in the direction they'd come. What? Rose shrieked. There's a dragon in this forest. Shh! Hissed Alannah. But too late. The slavers went quiet. Say that again, demanded one. Standing. A dragon. Here. Rose immediately went quiet and Alannah tugged at her bonds. That's, well. Ah. Is there one? Asked another of the slavers. Oddly, he didn't look scared. Tell us. Girl. There is. Alannah admitted. Where? In a cave. That way, she said, pointing again. You know what this means, said another slaver. The woman. Dragons have hoards of treasure, sapphires, rubies. You name it. Well, be rich. We go back and steal it. Their eyes glinted with greed. Then we kill the dragon. No, said Alannah. He doesn't have any gold. Any treasure, nothing. It's just an empty cave. All dragons have treasure. The woman scoffed. Not this one. Has different, he doesn't collect gold. Just royalty. Apparently. Said Ramiz. Not likely. Janik. Sonia, take the swords and kill the dragon. Bring back whatever you can carry and bury the rest. Oh. And bring back the dragon's teeth. We can sell them for a pretty price when we get to the capital. Wait, Alannah paused. Why was she trying to stop them? The dragon had flown her halfway across the kingdom and left her with no way to get home. She should be encouraging them. Still. The dragon might be an arrogant bastard. But had let her go. Wait. She called again. But the slavers had gone. Come on. Get up. A heavy boot jabbed her in the side. Alannah groaned and turned over. Get up. I said. You slaves need to be moving. Now. Grumbling. She opened her eyes. The sun was rising, casting shafts of light through the trees. Oh. Right. She was a slave. Wonderful. She stood up, groaning again as her back clicked. The other slaves were awake and alert, save for Rose, who seemed sleepier than she did. Alannah grabbed her elbow and helped her upright. Come on, she said. Best fall in line. The remaining two slavers cast nervous glances at the west, in the direction of the dragon's cave. But they still whipped the slaves into a line and got them moving again. They'd all been retied to the rope this morning in a different order, a way to keep their spirits down. Perhaps, and now Rose was next to her in the procession. Alannah wondered if that had been an accident or if the girl had arranged to be there. As the sun moved on across the sky, the slavers' anxious looks increased. Alannah watched them curiously. The dragon must be proving harder to kill than they thought. A few more hours and they stopped again for a breather. They hadn't crossed a stream yet and only the slavers carried water skins on them. She'd have to wait until they reached a river before she tried to escape. Rose knelt gracefully beside her, tucking her skirt around her ankles. How did you get here? Alannah asked her curiously. You're clearly noble-born. How did they capture you? Rose's pretty mouth turned down at the corners. My entourage and I set out from Dorothea a few days ago, she said. My father arranged for me to marry Arian, so I and a few guards were on our way to Felmir. Arian, repeated Alannah. You mean King Arian? Our king. That's right. I'm supposed to marry him. Which would make you a real princess. Father sent an army of guards with me, continued Rose. But they were surprised on the crossing by these bandits. My carriage, most of the soldiers, and the horses were all driven into the river. The slavers, she said, sending a glare at the two remaining, killed the others. Do they know who you are? Rose nodded miserably. Oh yes. They seem to think they'll get a lot of gold for me. But, if you don't arrive at the palace, the king will assume Dorothea broke its word and didn't send you. Alannah bit her lip. He'll think it's a declaration of war. But my father did agree. He sent me to maintain peace. If your guards vanished into the river, said Alannah, then they would have no proof that you'd left the kingdom. The king had numerous enemies in his own court who wanted to see him fail before he produced an heir. It wouldn't be difficult for them to sow discord and convince the kingdom of Dorothea's betrayal. Rose straightened her shoulders. My father would not accept such an attack on his honor. And we'd have war. Dorothea's infantry far surpassed their own. Tiana was covered in dense forest and tall mountain ranges and had little space for the kind of training an army of soldiers required. Its strength lay in its navy, not its infantry. Dorothea would invade, send scores of men over the river and into Tiana with no thought for the villages that sat in its path. Villages like her own. You need to get to the capital, she told Rose, before the king realizes you're missing. Enough talking, shouted a slaver. They were separating, hauling the slaves up, one by one. Get going. Come on. Only a few more hours and you'll be going home with your new masters. Safe and sound. He snickered. Rose stood, She looked pale and Alannah eyed her warily. "You're not going to faint, are you?" she asked. "Because I'm not carrying you." The girl scowled at her. "Charming. Are you married?" Her gaze dropped to Alannah's hands, which were bare save for the coil of white thread. "No. I thought not." Alannah bristled and opened her mouth to cut this princess down. Then something bright and silver burst out of the trees, with a ringing battle cry. "What on earth?" The slavers startled. One of them unsheathed his sword. But he looked as bewildered as Alannah felt. The silver thing smashed into him, and they both crashed to the ground. Alannah squinted past the reflection of the sun. The silver was armor. Full body plate stuff that barely let a chink of skin through. It was a knight, a sweltering one. Given all that metal. The knight rolled to his feet like an overfed dog and bared his own sword, giving another warbling battle cry. He lumbered forward, tripped over his own feet and plummeted head first to the ground, where he lay for a moment, motionless. "Well, that was disappointing," she murmured. "Do you think he's all right?" asked Rose, who, bless her dainty princess heart, was staring at the knight in some concern. "If he is, it won't last long." The slavers converged on the knight and Alannah winced. They stripped him of his armor and beat him, until the man was left with only a breastplate and a single pauldron. They hauled him to his feet. The man had a crop of tight curls and a dimple in his chin. "Hello, William," she said, as they tied him to the rope next to her. "Better late than never." They started walking again, and the knight eyed her sheepishly. I'm here to rescue you." "Really?" she said. "Because judging by the state you're in at the moment, I'm probably in a better position to rescue you." "Ah. I didn't expect them to be so organized." His hair was plastered to his head where it had been under the helmet and his dark skin was damp with sweat. "Or so fast. But I'm here now." "What took you so long?" "I had to hire a horse," he admitted, and she exhaled. "A knight who comes charging to my rescue without his own horse. I'm flattered." "Well, I think you were very brave," came Rose's voice, and William peered around Alannah at the princess. "You took on all those slavers without even knowing how skilled they were." The knight perked up like a puppy looking for treats. "It was very romantic. Coming all this way for your lady love." "Oh. We're not, has not my knight," interrupted Alannah. "Oh," said Rose, and immediately started to preen. "Oh. Really? This is Rose," Alannah added. "Rose. This is William. Has a knight. In case you hadn't noticed." "It's an honor to meet you," said William and bowed at the waist. Which, as they were walking with their hands tied, was quite an accomplishment. Rose flashed him a pearly smile. "Rose is a princess from Dorothea," said Alannah, with a great deal of amusement. "She's betrothed to King Arian." William deflated so quickly it was as though all the air had been sucked out of him. Alannah felt a little bad for having been the cause. Only a little. I see," he said. Then rallied beautifully. "Well, It would be my honor to escort you to the capital. William didn't look at her as he said it. But Alannah narrowed her eyes. First the dragon. Now, the princess. All he wanted was to deliver her to the king and earn his knighthood. Thank you, said Rose. Graciously. As though she'd been accepting knights' pledges all her life, which, to be fair, she probably had. Sounds great, said Alannah. It didn't matter what William wanted. As soon as they got free, they were going home. Except for the fact that we're all slaves. And we're probably going to be sold off to work the spice caravans as soon as we reach Felmir. They trudged for a moment in silence. I will think of something, William said. Finally. And I will free you both. Thank you, said Rose. Again. Alannah kept silent, trudging through the mud and leaves. William was as brave and as loyal as a knight could be. But when it came to thinking his way out of a problem, Alannah raised her tied hands and pushed hair off her clammy brow. She would just have to hatch a plan to stop the slavers and get all three of them out. As if in answer, her magic tingled at the tips of her fingers. It carried its own flavor of salt spray and mountain air, and settled at the base of her spine. Purring. She couldn't do much with it at the moment. Not with the slavers watching. She had to wait. They'd slip up sooner or later. It came no more than an hour later. Through no intervention by her or by the knight, but by the unwitting assistance of the dragon. They were walking under a particularly dense part of the canopy. The trees twisted and gnarled, growing so close they melded into each other. The whole procession slowed as they navigated through the undergrowth. Alannah clambered over a tall, horizontal branch that came up to her midsection. The slack in the rope as she paused enabled William to help Rose over another tree. The princess cast doe eyes up at him and the boy blinked, looking dazed. Oh, dear. William didn't have much experience with women, especially small, fragile ones. His instinct was to guard and protect, even if it was unwarranted, which was probably why she'd never been interested in pursuing his adolescent crush on her. Rose, on the other hand, it would be perfect for him. If it weren't for the fact that she was already betrothed to someone else. Not just anyone. Either, the king. The sooner she broke them apart, the better. Abruptly the slaves ahead of her stopped. Alannah almost walked straight into Rose. What's going on? She asked. I don't know. Hey, called a slaver. Come on. Get. Then he stopped. The whole forest went still. Frowning, Alannah moved to the side to see if she could see what had caused them to stop. Then she heard what the others had. A slow beat and a rush of wind. Wings. The forest erupted into chaos. Alannah's feet swept out from underneath her as the slaves tried to scatter and forgot they were still attached. The rope jerked her arms out of her shoulders and her wrists burned. A flash of fire in the corner of her vision, and someone screamed. A slaver hurtled through the canopy and slammed into the earth at her feet. Someone screamed again. The dragon crashed through the trees. A blur of black scales and violet, shredding the forest like paper. He pounced on the slavers like a cat among mice. And he paid no attention to the slaves. To them. This was her chance. Kneeling, Alannah unwound the thread from her finger. She'd never used this spell on anything stronger than wool before. But now was the best time to try. She looped the thread around the rope that tied her hands, twisting her fingers awkwardly until they hurt. Then she muttered a quick spell and pulled the two ends of the thread taut. The loop of thread tightened around the rope, glowing. Smoke rose from the strands and the rope frayed and fell apart. Alannah cooled the thread with a word and sent up a quick, grateful prayer to the goddess. The dragon was making short work of the slavers. Underneath the sound of trees tearing and men flying sideways was a constant, rumbling growl. Another burst of fire and the whole damn forest would be alight. She did not want to be here when that happened. Quick! William! Give me your hands. That dragon. William gave her his wrists, but his attention remained fixed on the battle. Is it the same one that kidnapped you? Yes. She answered without looking up. His hands clenched into fists. And who knows how many others he's kidnapped? Many. I would guess. She muttered. I swear on my life that I will avenge you. I'm not dead. She replied, amused. The knots loosened and finally came undone. Come on, she said, standing. The village is back that way. We need to. But William went straight to Rose. He bent over her solicitously and started on her bonds. Alannah exhaled. Here we go. Rose was trembling, her eyes huge and frightened. That's a dragon. By the gods. What do we do? William pulled himself up. Fear not, princess. I will protect you. Not without a sword, Alannah pointed out. You're right. William spun and leapt on the nearest slaver's body. The man groaned, so the dragon wasn't killing them after all. Just mauling them something vicious. William grabbed the man's short sword from where it was half unsheathed, brandishing it like a loon. He dove into the fray. On your guard, dragon. Oh. Just brilliant. Now she was going to have to rescue him, too. Rose gasped. What's he doing? Hell be killed. Alannah snorted. I should be so lucky. One glance told her the dragon was in no danger. It had been arrested by William's sudden charge. But it was evading his wild swipes with ease. Alannah turned to the rest of the slaves. She worked quickly and quietly, untying the rope from each one and ushering them away. Each one threw her a grateful glance and disappeared down the trail. Alannah turned back to the fight and put her hands on her hips. Rose hadn't moved. The slavers were all either unconscious or missing. And William and the dragon were dancing around each other, or at least William was dancing, and every now and again the dragon stepped out of his way. This could go on for hours. Alannah cupped her hands around her mouth and shouted. William! Give it up already. Will you? Sweat beaded on William's brow and he was already panting. But he darted a surreptitious glance at Rose and called. No. I'll never give up. How brave. Rose whispered, starry-eyed. Oh. Please. She switched tactics. She called out to the dragon. Dragon. Put a stop to this. Would you? I have better things to do than wait around in a muddy dress while you two dance with each other. A snort of amusement. Magic touched her skin. All brimstone and velvet. His reptilian form melted away. This time had actually deigned to dress himself. In loose leather breeches with a cream shirt and a jacket that covered the words of the spell on his throat. If possible. He looked even more handsome than before. William drew up short. Face riddled with confusion. How did you do that? What kind of fiend are you? The dragon grinned at him. Magic. Obviously. Oh. And you might want to practice using that blade before you go up against another dragon. Assuming you live that long. Then he bent and offered Rose his hand. I hope I didn't scare you too much. My dear. No, not at all, said Rose and took his hand. She was blushing 10 shades of her namesake. I wasn't frightened. Little liar, thought Alannah. The dragon's nostrils flared. You're a princess. He threw Alannah an arch look and she frowned at him. Don't you dare. She thought as loudly as possible. That girl is betrothed to our king, and I'm not having you make her think she's in love with you only to ruin her and dump her in the forest. Jealous. She snorted. Hardly. Just promise me you won't touch her. Wouldn't dream of it, replied the dragon breezily. He squeezed Rose's hand, and let go. Are you the dragon? The girl asked. I mean, were you the dragon? He inclined his head in a graceful salute. I was. And I am. What should we call you? In my language, he said, with a smirk. I'm known as Deathbringer. She had to stop rolling her eyes. They were starting to hurt. But I appreciate that may not be the easiest name. So you may call me Damien. Your Highness. He hadn't been this charming to her the other night. No wonder they all fell in lust with him. The enemy of all innocence and their fathers everywhere. I didn't know dragons could become human, said Rose, fluttering her eyelashes. Do you have something in your eye? Alannah asked dryly. Rose blinked at her. But before she could respond, William was at her side 4-way. You can't travel through this forest on your own, William said. I'll go with you. Protect you. So you know the way? Rose asked, brightening. Well. No. He admitted. Not in so many words. They turned to her. Noble idiot. Alannah breathed out. Pushed her hands through her tangled mat of hair. If we take Rose back to the city, she said. A carriage home would do, said Alannah. And the thought of riding back to her village in a plush, comfortable coach mollified her a little. She was untying her thread in preparation to cast again when she noticed the dragon hadn't left. Don't you have other princesses to kidnap? She asked him. He shrugged. Not really. And yet you're still here. She raised an eyebrow at him. Felmir isn't very fond of dragons. He murmured 3. If nothing else, you could use a 3rd pair of eyes. All right. He had a point. But she wasn't going to cave that easily. Why? What's in it for you? Does there need to be something in it for me? Yes, muttered William. Behind her. He showed a glint of teeth in his smile. I haven't spent time with anything but sheep in over 3 years. Comes the voice in her head, 44 take you one at a time. He added. But I'm not sure you'd appreciate that. Leaving you alone with Rose, or William is not my first choice. Alannah sent. Frowning at him. That's what I thought. Besides, every outpost between here and the capital is stationed with dragon slayers. They'd shoot me down as soon as I came in range. William inhaled audibly. We should walk, he said. It's safer that way. Actual freeing. Damien grinned as if he'd heard the thought. Alannah wrinkled her nose at him. Fine. You can come. But no eating anyone. And no seducing of innocent young girls. She continued mentally. As you wish. He conceded. But you should know that I don't consider you an innocent young girl. Her flighty heart skipped a beat. Down, girl. She told it privately. Those teeth are not just for decoration. Glad we're agreed. She said out loud. Alannah pulled her thread tight and murmured the incantation. Damien watched closely. His gaze on her hands. The thread fell in a line, straight. This time. Thank the goddess, pointing north. Alannah nodded. Pleased. That way. William turned to the princess. After you. Your Highness. Call me Rose. Please. They fell into step side by side. Following the path her thread had laid. Alannah picked up the silk and wound it around her second finger. Leaving the other half on her index finger just above her first knuckle. Like a ring. That was quite impressive. She jumped. The dragon stood at her elbow. Staring at her hands, which were covered in mud with uneven, torn fingernails. Oh. Well. She brushed them together. Hardly. It's just a location spell, she said. But the thread. He took her hand. Then. And examined the piece of string. His touch was gentle and there was something unself-conscious about the way he did it. So she didn't immediately pull away. It didn't feel like the game that he was playing with her before. Or with Rose. It's silk. But I assume you can use other material as well. His gaze flicked up to her face and she nodded. Deceptively simple. Most people would go out of their way to use something more elaborate than thread. To show off their power. He let go and Alannah struggled not to rub her skin where he'd been touching her. I'm good at sewing. She answered. And thread is something I'm bound to have on me no matter where I am. It's easy to get hold of. Smart. He said, and she glanced him to see if he was being facetious. But his expression held only mild curiosity. Come on. She said. Uncomfortably aware that the distance between them and the others was growing. We should get a move on. He stepped back. Gestured at the path before them. After you. Oh no. You first. He looked wounded. Then. You don't trust me. Not even a little bit. Dragon. Damien. He said. The expression dissolving into a tiny smirk. Unless you'd rather I call you witch. She made a face and he laughed. This will certainly be an interesting journey, he thought at her, and Alannah sighed. That's just what she was hoping it would not be. Alannah clambered over another root. It'd been hours. And the forest looked the same as it had when they left the slavers. If it wasn't for her thread, she'd swear they were going around in circles. Rose stopped, cupping her arms around her stomach. I'm hungry. Is there anything we can eat? There are mushrooms, William said, glancing around. Maybe we could. Absolutely not, Alannah said, drawing level with them. Those mushrooms are poisonous. I'm sure we can find something, he reassured the girl. Alannah examined the nearest tree. Willow. There's a river nearby. Once we reach it, we'll be able to set up camp and catch some fish. Rose nodded and started walking again. But the night stayed. Surely we can find something, William whispered. She's not used to this kind of travel. So I gathered. That wasn't a difficult assumption to make. But there's nothing here we can eat. So we don't exactly have much choice. William pressed his lips together and stalked after the princess. Alannah sighed. Then realized the dragon was standing next to her. You're quiet, she told him, falling into line behind William. I've never spent this much time with humans, he replied. It's different. Why not? Asked Alannah, with honest curiously. You have the power to look human whenever you want. What's stopping you? The smirk that touched Damien's lips was self-deprecating. Humans aren't too fond of dragons. You're not doing yourself any favors by stealing gold and kidnapping princesses, she pointed out. He snorted. Semantics. She had nothing to say to that. And they walked on in silence. The sky above the canopy was marbled with cloud but empty of birds. Or dragons. For that matter. Why aren't there more of you out here? She asked. Don't dragons have families? Dragons aren't susceptible to intimate relationships, he said, purring the words. Once we've hatched, we make our own way in the world. Sounds like fun, Alannah muttered. You ever meet? Later on. By accident. If our territories overlap. But we rarely recognize other hatchlings. He said it breezily and Alannah wondered if he meant it. And you? He asked, and she blinked. Me? Me what? You and this night, he said, gesturing ahead to William. You seem close. William and I grew up together. His heart is in the right place, she said, carefully. I don't doubt it. But his mind doesn't seem to be there at all. She smothered a grin. A tree had grown over their path and Alannah stopped to climb it. Damien's hands slipped around her waist. Although I'm glad to hear that the two of you are not betrothed. He flashed those sharp teeth and lifted her clean over the tree. Alannah wobbled a little when she landed and frowned, annoyed at herself. Damien leapt nimbly over the trunk after her, and she turned away. Spoke over her shoulder. Well, you've been around here for a while, she said. You know anything about this forest? Not much, he said. I don't fly over this place often. There's something at the center. Some kind of dark magic. I'm not skilled enough to tell what it is. But, perhaps you are. So the tales are true. Dragons do have a silver tongue. That's not all our tongues are famous for. I want nothing to do with you or your tongue. Dragon. I'm beginning to see why most witches are old, he replied, a smile in his voice. The grouchiness must accelerate growth. Ha! Ha! William and Rose had increased their lead and Alannah quickened her pace. Why are you so keen to get back to your village? The dragon asked. If not for the night, then, for who? Why won't you let this go? Why won't you answer the question? She suppressed the urge to fling a curse at him. He'd see that as winning. There's no one waiting for me, she thought back, uncomfortable with the turn in the conversation. My grandmother was the only family I had. So you have no one there. And yet you seem desperate to return, he observed. It's my home. It was odd. This telepathy thing. She'd never focused her thoughts like this before. But as they kept talking it got easier. Of course I want to go back to it. Wouldn't you? Then she remembered what Hed said about family and winced. Home is not a single place, he said, distantly. She glanced back and saw he was staring off through the trees. A house or a cave is merely an empty shell if there is no one to fill it. She eyed him. Are you sure you're not actually a human who can turn into a dragon? Positive, he said aloud. Alannah stepped out of the tangle of trees into a small clearing. William and Rose had stopped and were sitting underneath a beech tree nearby. They looked exhausted. She untied the thread and recast her location spell. It pointed north. And there was a small hook at the end that indicated their destination was near. She'd cast for the river. This time. Nearly there. We should stop for a while. Alannah glanced at William. It's not far. We can be there in a couple of hours. The princess needs rest, he replied, jutting out his chin in that way that meant he was fully prepared for an argument and would do whatever it took to get what he wanted. All right, said Alannah, sighing. Just a few minutes. Though. The sooner they got to the river, the better. Now would be a good time to demonstrate those hunting skills, she told the dragon, who'd stopped so close to her, their shoulders were almost touching. That draconic body heat was seriously distracting. He nodded. I can go without food for days. Sometimes, I forget humans need it so frequently. When we get to the river. You could, Alannah stopped. Glanced again at the clearing they stood in. Tiny pearly mushrooms bordered the edge. Slowly. She turned in a circle. Lots of mushrooms. Oh. Bugger. The dragon looked faintly alarmed. What is it? She pressed her fingers to her temples. We just walked into a fairy ring. Fairies? Asked Rose. Standing. You mean like wings and gifts and dust? No, I do not. Snapped Alannah. I wish I meant wings and gifts and dust. These rings are portals to the city realm, as in Theos Se. And the fair folk are really not keen on trespassers. Then we should leave, said Damien. Too late, Alannah replied wearily. We only get out now if they let us. That's ridiculous. As if to disprove her theory. William stood and approached the edge of the clearing. There's no wall. We can just walk away. Alannah gestured at the line of white-brown mushrooms standing between them and their freedom. Be my guest. The knight squared his shoulders and strode towards the forest. When he got to the mushrooms he just stopped. But his legs kept moving, as if someone was holding him in place. The sight was eerie. You see what I mean? She said. Useless. He stopped. Frustrated. But, this is impossible. They're just mushrooms. It is magic. Alannah whirled around. Leaning against the beech tree stood a long-limbed man with cropped pale hair. His eyes were the color of garnet and his ears were tapered. The length of her hand from her wrist to the tips of her fingers. Faye. You're one of the city, said Rose. Wide-eyed. She didn't seem the least bit afraid. That's correct. The Fae's voice was as frosty and bleak as the north wind. You should not have stepped into our circle. William bristled. How dare you speak to her in that tone? It was unintentional. Interrupted Alannah. We weren't concentrating, and we didn't realize this was a portal. How unfortunate. The Fae's gaze fell on Damien and darkened. And yet you brought a dragon into our territory. Alannah glanced at Damien, who was giving back glare for glare. Let me guess. Dragons and the city don't get along. She murmured. No. We don't. It was an accident. Rose pushed past William and blinked those wide eyes at the Fae. Can't you let us go? Please. The Fae unbent. Okay. Maybe Rose would come in handy after all. The city do not look kindly on intruders, he said. Grudgingly. He was starting to look mollified. Though. Alannah held her breath. I appreciate that this must be an inconvenience, Rose said. Smoothly. If you release us, we will grace your fairy ring with sacred offerings and, once I reach the palace, I can ensure this part of the forest is left sacred. There are few as considerate as you, said the Fae. Some who enter our forest, destroy the mushrooms and rip apart the magic binding them. His eyes glinted. If you are telling the truth. Of course she's telling the truth. William interrupted heatedly. A princess would never lie. The Fae tilted his head and Alannah closed her eyes, praying to be delivered from all idiots. Princess. He repeated. You are the daughter of a king. Because she couldn't be the daughter of a queen, muttered Alannah. Rose nodded, bemused. And the lanky Fae took a step away from the tree. His gaze traveled over her pink dress, almost as spattered with mud as Alannah's, and back up. Magic tingled through her skin like a warning. Rose. Excellent. The Fae said. You will make a fine addition to my collection. Collection. Rose echoed. And I really wanted to get home sometime this year. Just great. What do you mean? Whispered Damien. In her ear. We're in trouble. She replied. The Fae held out his hand and rose. The idiot. Took it. Here we go. Thought Alannah as the world around them melted into darkness. Alannah opened her eyes. And shut them again. Quickly. I'm dreaming. I have to be. Taking a deep breath, she dared another peek. Above her soared a glass roof, marbled with violet shadows, and dusted with sparkles. Tall glass columns spiraled up from a white stone floor, each one ornately carved, and, again, sparkling. The glittering little dots even covered the throne-like chairs that filled the room. But there were no windows. Alannah swung her legs off the velvet chaise longue she'd been deposited on and stood. Where are we? The Fey realm. Damien leaned against the far wall, arms crossed and protecting a general attitude of grumpiness. Between them stood a long table brimming with more food than she'd seen in her entire life. Crusted chicken stuffed with soft cheese and tomatoes. Fluffy rice studded with vegetables. Doughy flatbreads gleaming with oil. Fat coral prawns, still in their shells. We shouldn't eat that. Right? She said, sidling closer. Eating in the Fey realm was probably not a good idea. Go ahead, said Damien, who shrugged when she looked at him. You're already suffused with Fey magic. Better to survive as best you can than starve yourself. Alannah helped herself to a slice of thin, crispy bread topped with sliced olives and yellow cheese. Okay, she mumbled. I am getting the recipe for this. Damien's mouth curled up at the corner. So, she added, how long have we been here? No more than a day, the dragon replied, although it's difficult to tell without a gauge. She took another bite. Where's Rose? He took her. This came from William, doing his best to wear a hole in the floor. We need to rescue her. At once. Alannah finished the appetizer and turned to a plate of grilled rice balls. How? Exactly. We have no idea where she is. No idea where we are. And no idea how to get out of here. She gestured to their prison with a half-eaten ball. Or do you see a way out? William stopped, his lower lip jutting out. There must be a way. Not yet. She cast another glance at the dragon. Bet you regret tagging along now. Not really. I mean, I don't like being in this realm, he admitted. But I've never been this entertained. That's your problem. Boredom. I spend most of my time in the sky. Birds aren't that interesting, he said. You, on the other hand, are incredibly so. If you say so, she replied, unimpressed. He laughed with all his teeth. You just proved my point. Alannah decided to change the subject. That was infinitely safer. Aren't you eating? She said, gesturing to the banquet. I can't eat from this realm, he said. Dragon and Fey magic is, by its nature, in conflict. You mean it would give you indigestion? She said, dryly. You could have just said. He blinked and that devilish smile made another appearance. We have to do something. William burst out. He clenched and unclenched his hands as he paced. Rose is out there with that monster. Who knows what he's doing to her? I was afraid this might happen, she confided. To Damien. He does feel strongly, doesn't he? Alannah sat in one of the chairs, comfy, despite the glass legs and the sparkles, and tucked her feet underneath her. The city aren't monsters, she told William. From the looks of this place. Our kidnapper's part of the Sealy court. Which means he's honorable. She explained at the blank look the knight gave her. He snorted. Honorable enough to kidnap a princess. Alannah shot a look at Damien. Maybe he's a dragon in disguise. We don't actually kidnap women. You know? He protested. That was Sandragon. One time. And now you're dining out on reputation alone. Clever. A shrug. It's much easier when you're not fighting off a mob. What about Rose? William interrupted. He could be doing anything to her. He said he had a collection. The dragon seemed to be enjoying himself. Has probably just turned her into a servant. Or, at worst, a very pretty ornament. An ornament. They're not cruel masters. Damien continued. She might even be happy here. Alannah dropped her head in her hands. We can't leave her here, shouted William. I refuse to take one step outside this room unless it's with the intention of rescuing Rose, the princess. He corrected. Hastily. You could always stay here with her, suggested the dragon. All right. Enough. Alannah held up her hands before William actually exploded. We can't get out of this realm without the Fae's help. So we need to find him. And we're not leaving without Rose. She confirmed. William deflated. If I can repeat your very sensible question, how? Exactly? Asked Damien. Alannah exhaled through her teeth. I have no idea. She admitted. What do you know about Fae? Not a lot. I don't have much to add beyond what you've already said. What if? Across the room. A door cracked open. They froze. The seams of the entrance had been invisible in the wall. But now the stones swung open like a door and a new Fae entered their prison. His clothes were shoddier. Less well cut. But he had the sharp features and long ears of a city. A servant. William took 2 giant steps forward. Grabbed the man by the lapels of his jacket and slammed him up against the marble. Where's Rose? He asked. In a low, trembling voice. Where is she? The Fae didn't even look rustled. William, let him go. Damien grabbed her arm. Wait. The dark-haired Fae snapped his fingers and the magic that touched Alannah's spine felt like a rush of oil. 1 minute William was standing there, pressing the Fae into the wall. The next, he was across the room and surrounded by bars. The bars were thin, gold, and melded into the ceiling as if they'd grown into place. William, on the other side, had less than 4 feet of space to move in. Alannah stared at him. What in the goddess' name? William shook the bars of his new cell. Let me out. The Fae straightened his clothes. I don't think that will be possible, he replied. Coolly. You need to learn to obey. Speechless, William gripped the bars and stared. Alannah still hadn't pulled away from Damien. She hated to admit it. But she felt safer with him at her back. Who are you? I am Abel, servant to your master. Winter. He's no master of mine, Damien muttered. Ebel shot him a glare. You will obey. Eventually. This was stupid. Obviously brute force and threats weren't the way to deal with these fae. We'd like to see winter, she said. Please, it's difficult to obey without knowing what he wants from us. Ebel considered that while he cleared the table. Very well, he said. After a moment. I will take you to him. And you'll let William go? She asked. Hopefully. No. The boy is too dangerous to remain unguarded. Ah well. It was worth a shot. Wait, you can't just leave me here. The knight called. You'll be safer in there, said the dragon. And then. In her mind, and so will everyone else. Don't worry, said Alannah. As William turned an apoplectic purple. Well, find Rose and make sure she's all right. He only scowled. The fae collected the plates and headed for the door. This way. Alannah followed him without another word. The dragon tailed her. Are you sure about this? Fae get offended easily. What are you trying to say? She sent back. That I offend people by my presence. No. That would be your knight. Don't call him mine. And you make sure you're polite. She added. The last thing she needed was a smart-mouthed dragon. Your wish is my command. There was a sultry edge to the thought. But it seemed more like a knee-jerk reaction than intentional flirting. Damien's focus was on the beautiful sculpted roof and the glittering walls. If his horns were ears, they would have been laying flat against his head. They followed the fae servant through winding corridors. Under a clear blue sky. Sunlight warmed through the glass and warmed her until sweat prickled under her arms and at the small of her back. There were no more doors. Just tall, arched openings that led to more passages. Other fae passed them, giving her barely a second glance but sneering at Damien. The dragon ignored them. His shoulders squared and his mouth tight. And yet here he was. By her side. Despite the fact he could have stayed with William in their prison. Alannah exhaled and felt a coil of tension leave her. She couldn't relax too much, he was still a dragon. This odd loyalty wouldn't last once they got back to their own realm.